My name is Joe Houlihan. I'm convener for military history, a group I run along with Michael Davis, who I know is in the front row of the audience. And nice to see you, Michael. I'm really sorry I'm not here in person. I was due to be in the room tonight, but the dreaded coronavirus finally caught up with me, so discretion is being the better part of valor. Well, welcome and thank you for coming tonight. I know many of you will be familiar with our talks here at the BRLSI. Anyone joining online, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat online. Anyone in the room, please feel free to ask your questions at the end of the talk. So I'm delighted to introduce tonight's speaker, Matthew Cook. Matthew is a resident of Widcombe, has been there for some years, although not born and bred here. His family does have a connection with Bath going back many years. And Matthew is a really interesting character because he is an artist who has been on the front line in Iraq and Afghanistan, doing his work for the Times newspaper and for other organisations. And his work, as you will see shortly, is really, really evocative, incredibly skillful. But also, I think what most impresses me about Matthew is that his willingness, as far as I can see, to go anywhere to get the right picture, however dangerous the terrain, however dangerous the situation. So with no further ado, I will welcome Matthew, and I hope everyone enjoys the talk tonight. And as I say, if you have questions, please save them for the end, and then I'm sure Matthew will be happy to answer. So Matthew, over to you.
Thank you very much, Joe. That's a fabulous introduction. It's only half of it, but true. Just going to start off with playing you a video, a short video clip. As the old adage says, a picture is worth 1,000 words. No matter what a video clip's.
Get it inside, but can you just see where that contact's coming from?
So that was my rather shaky film footage from sort of Valentine's Day 10 years ago now in the poppy field of Helmand, Afghanistan. I found myself with the platoon commander, pointer here, back to us. We're sitting up on the bank eating a melted Yorkie bar from the ration packs when we came under a spray of belt-fed machine gun fire. I dived into the ditch, which I have no recollection of doing, with a stick in my eye, so I was weeping over one eye. And I'd torn a hole in my pullover. It's a pullover my wife had given me for Christmas. She was going to kill me. We came on fire for about 2 hours. We were pinned down in this ditch. There were 4 firing points, all firing from out of the sun, so quite knew what they were doing. We even had a drive-by shooting. It was a Toyota pickup with a driver was shooting out of his window, 2 guys in the back shooting, which got most of the soldiers and us was laughing. There were 4 insurgents killed. There was UAV observing it. 4 insurgents killed, so as well as serious measure. I can say my wife is here. She didn't kill me. Apologise, Joe. Right, I'm going to start my journey as a war artist. There will be.
Sure, he was in that hole, wasn't he?
Yes, sorry, that's my shaky film footage, yes. Technology. So I was drawing while I was in that ditch. I had 2 hours to draw. I wasn't shooting back for loads of time. I guess what I'm trying to say is I found my limitation that I could only do line drawings, all quite shaky hands, all a bit intense. And the drawings, I couldn't convey the violence, the noise, the excitement, the adrenaline. And I kind of found that was as far as I could draw. But I'll get back to that. So these were some of the sketches in my sketchbook. But as I say, I just didn't convey the violence that was going on. My journey to get there as a war artist started way back in 2002. I've been commissioned by the Times newspaper to draw St Ethelboda's church in the city. It had been blown up in the Bishopsgate bomb about 10 years before, and they were trying to get funding to rebuild it. And I was there with the Times editor, Peter Stoddart, at the time, and I mentioned to him, how about sending an artist out to a natural disaster, as a volcano, a flood, a tsunami? How about send an artist as well as photographers, and I'll report back. And he said, what about a war? And then I said, well, I just happen to be in the reserves, and yeah, I'll be up for that. A year later, I got a call from the Times design department, and first thing I said, do you still want to be a war artist? Yeah. What are you doing next week? Yeah, it wasn't quite how I saw it come. The next day, they asked me to go into the Times. So I left the Times newspaper in Wapping, on the train home. I had a throbbing arm full of jabs. I had a fistful of dollars. I had a huge black bag full of kit. Not a very good drawing. I had an NBC suit, because they were expecting a large nerve agent attack. So NBC stands for nuclear, biological, and chemical. I keep saying NBC. So, yeah, cool. I had a chemical detector paper, a helmet, a respirator. I also had the most comprehensive first aid kit I think I've ever had. It even had suture needles with thread. And I'm no Rambo. I couldn't imagine myself stitching up my own wounds or back. But anyway, I also had 3 auto-injectors for atropine, which is supposed to counter the nerve agents. If you encounter the nerve agent, I had to jab these into my leg if I came under some of the symptoms. Some of the symptoms of nerve agents are pinpoint pupils, so I'm not going to see that in myself. That's saliva and a runny nose, which I had most of the time, and tummy ache and diarrhea, and I had that some of the time. So it's hard to tell when you had nerve agent poisoning. If I got it wrong, jabbed the atropine, I could die from atropine poisoning. So I wasn't too happy with any of that self-administered first aid. I went on a 3-day missile environment course where I was with 4 other journalists, and it was run by 3 ex-SAS soldiers from the Gulf War in 1991. They put us through our paces in navigation, trauma management, wide awareness, vehicle ambush, kidnap scenarios, which I hadn't even thought of. So the reality was beginning to dawn on. While I was waiting for my Kuwaiti visa, I had about a week, no, I had a couple of days in fact. I searched for desert boots, which the regular army didn't have enough boots. So the soldiers had bought up all the army surplus boots. I managed to find, felt like the last pair in England. I bought my first laptop. I had no body armour, so I had to take my issue army one, minus the ceramic plate. So I wasn't happy with that. It wasn't quite going to plan. I ended up repacking my kit, updated my will, and then promised my wife that I would stay clear of danger. I arrived in Kuwait. I was on a half-empty flight. It turned out to be the last flight out. It was me, the TV crew, and the US Marine guard from the embassy. They kept their weapons in the overhead lockers. We turned up to Kuwait airport, thousands of people trying to leave. There was just this hustle and bustle, everyone else going the opposite direction. I had planned to meet a Times photographer there. The Times had this cunning plan that he was going to photograph my drawings and then would send them via satellite phone each evening to the Times picture desk, and they would use them. which is a great plan, kind of worked out initially. We got accredited, which meant I got a press card, so I was allowed to get through checkpoints. Then we had a couple of days to lead up to the war, so we found, more by accident, came across a couple of British airfields where the tornadoes were based. Richard was taking pictures of me, drawing pictures of aircraft. This is some Harrier pilots back from the reconnaissance mission. All the aircraft were loaded with live munitions. This is a laser-guided JDAM bomb. And of course, Richard and I wanted to see what the actual border looked like. So we drove up to the Iraqi border. There was a real disappointment. It was literally this sandburn and a 5 kilometre demilitarised zone before we got to Iraq. So it wasn't quite what I imagined, quite hard to draw apart from the American guards. Carried on searching around in the desert. We came across the 101st Airborne, the American Screaming Eagles, busy digging ditches during a sandstorm. My drawing, I had to adapt. I've never really drawn line drawings before, so I kind of had to hoof it. The subject matter was very immediate and fast. Just had to learn on the spot. More of the American guards up at the border. We found a logistics base where the Americans were based, obviously queuing up for a Burger King. Everyone's carrying their respirators. And during this queue, there came a classic Second World War air raid siren, the warbling wail. But the American, there was a code word saying lightning, lightning, and this was a code word meaning that it wasn't a drill, this was for real. At which point, the whole queue scattered. We all ran for different concrete bunkers. About 10 of us ran for the nearest one. Only squeezed in 6 people. I was one of those 6. Everyone was putting their respirators on, trying to put their NBC kit on. I had time up. Once my respirators were on, I was happy to start drawing. An American soldier in the background was in tears and crying. Another one was praying loudly, crossing himself. It took about 20 minutes for the all clear. And that was the first shot of the war, so this meant the war had started. That afternoon, there were about 5 further air raid attacks. I was at a British base, all running for cover there. Unbeknownst to me, I had one of my drawings on the front page of the Times on the day that the war broke out. So it's a bit bizarre. While I was in Iraq, I had no idea what was happening about the war, so I was completely in the dark. I had to get written permission to cross the border, and which was frustrating as hell. There was such a delay, so I ended up waiting for about 2 days. In the meantime, the Ministry of Defence put on trips to cross the border up to Iraq. So I was sent forward with the Royal Horse Artillery in this battered minibus with the windows painted black so you couldn't see where you were going. And dropped off for a couple of hours with the Royal Horse Artillery. Basra is just over, it's the muddy, oil-stained waste ground. And these were the forward observers. So these guys were calling in the artillery onto Basra with the enemy positions. Just the other side of this wasteland was the tech college. And this is where the Fedayeen and the Iraqi army were firing mortars and artillery coming this way. So it's quite exciting. Yes, being quite an arsenal. The first Iraqi prisoners I've seen. And then I'd get driven back to Kuwait. I'd go back to my hotel and have dinner in the restaurant. It was the weirdest event. And that first night, I remember getting back to the hotel and Apocalypse Now was the only channel. I got flown out to see some of the ships out in the Gulf. Had to be lowered down along with the mail bag. Destroyed some of the ships. This is HMS Solution. And then another trip, just me, I got taken forward in a warrior to some of the infantry foot patrols. And this is a small border town, Safwan, literally on the Iraqi border, the first place you come across. So again, the quick sort of line drawings, that's all I could do. It's very moving subject. There was some shooting going on in the local square. No idea what that was about. Troops taking cover behind Mickey Mouse. Eventually, I got the piece of paper allowing me to cross the border. So this was it. I was going to go to war. Just showing the setup of my car. I've got the satellite phone dishes up on the top. That had to face a certain direction to pick up the satellites so I could send my drawings. Got my first laptop there. There's a huge hub of wires connected. I've got a scanner in the back. And it's all connected to the cigarette lighter in the car, so I had to keep turning the engine on so the battery didn't flat. I've got a first car rental, and Richard Mills, the photographer, Sod's Law at the Times, wanted him doing something different in QE. So I ended up on my own. In my first car rental, I forgot to sign a piece of paper saying I would take it into Iraq. I managed to get to an art shop and found a huge orange panel of sticky back plastic, which was the universal recognition of basically to stop American aircraft shooting you. So with my piece of paper now, I could go up to the MPs and cross into Iraq. Just before I got there, I took the number plates, the Q80 number plates off my car. As I said, I put this orange panel on. I put some recognition chevrons in black tape in the doors. I covered my car in as much mud and sand as I just wanted to be subdued as I could in my giant four-wheel drive. As a reservist, in my head, I saw myself going to war with my mates, parachuting into some airfield, obviously winning a gallantry medal. My reality turned out to be car rental on my own, with no map and no plan. All gone a bit wrong. Approached the Iraq border. Loads of kids jumped on the back of my car as soon as I crossed the border. I'd stolen the sheet from the hotel, very proud of that, and I'd raided across all the fuel and food in the back of my car so no one could see any of the kit. But the kids still jumped to my car, they were all trying to open the door. But thankfully, there's a very rutted road, not bounced off. That's my introduction to Iraq. As I said, there was a 5-kilometre demilitarised zone, so I had to pass across this open area, which was covered in tank ditches, anti-tank ditches, tank lines, and then halfway across they came to this abandoned United Nations base. They'd left about a week before. So I parked up my car, did some drawings, and I curiously killed the cat. I pulled under the barbed wire, managed to get under the gate and climbed up the tower, just to have a look around. There wasn't much up there, and I felt too obvious standing up on this high ground, so I came back down. Well, I've got to just leap forward 5 months when I was mobilised with the army. We were having an ammunition technician officer telling us about booby traps and unexploded weapons. And up on his screen came that United Nations tower, and then a picture of a booby trap at the bottom of the door with a small explosive charge. Who left it there, I have no idea. I was quite glad I hadn't opened that door. So already I'd used up one of my lines heading across the I said I had no map. It turned out in Iraq, in Kuwait, it was illegal to sell Iraqi maps. So they've been fighting for some years. So all I had was a ripped out page in the Times newspaper. I navigated the sort of railway line and waterways marked. I had to navigate by that. This was my first sight coming out of the demilitarised zone. It's a blown up anti-aircraft gun, and the black smoke was Basra. I could still hear the fighting in Basra. I just headed for the black smoke. Don't know how, but I found Basra Palace. It was guarded by British tanks. I was a bit relieved there. The first soldier I met happened to be in the Royal Horse Artillery, and I showed him my press card, which gave my name. And he goes, "Matthew, I've been waiting for you. What took you so long?" "I don't know. What?" He said, "I've been phoning London, phoning the Times, trying to get you to come out and draw our guns and draw us while we're serving in Iraq." So the irony, the first soldier I came across had been trying to get in touch with me, and he thought I'd somehow got this message and tracked him down. But it was pure coincidence. We kind of met at the gate in Basra. So they took me under their wing, allowed me to park my car. There's the orange marker panel, the chevron on the side. Luxurious accommodation. This was, that's my bed mat and my day sack and my flip flops. That's all I'm very cheap to look after. That's all I had. This was their ammunition store in the palace. Some of these come out a lot small. Once I was within the palace, palace sounds very grand. It's actually like a faux palace. It had been looted. The electricity, there's no electricity, there's no running water. But there was a perimeter wall with security towers, and once my vehicle was in there, I felt quite safe. The oil fires were still burning. There was a threat of attack. There was occasional rockets and water still coming in, but it was a safe base to start drawing. I then had a couple of weeks, several weeks there. So at the time, Basra had only just been taken. There was looting everywhere. Managed to get to the technical college. This is a taxi taking away a filing cabinet. The lecturers were actually very friendly, quite happy. They saw it as their right to take back what Saddam Hussein had taken off them. This was some of the damage caused by the British guns, by the looters that were taken. Once I was with the Royal Horse Artillery, the sort of word spread that there was an artist in theatre. In hindsight, it turned out I was the only artist there during the actual war fighting phase. And then the Irish Guard said, "Oh, will you come and join us?" The day I joined them, they had the weirdest job I'd ever heard of, was to break into the Bank of Iraq to secure the money from the looters. So this was trying to drill through the vault doors underground. There's a rather sad backstory that the looters had put a couple of hand grenades on an air vent above the vault doors. The hand grenades had gone off, they created enough of a gap, but only small enough for 2 kids to be pushed in. I hope they volunteered. Don't know the full story. But the kids were then meant to pass out the gold and the money, hence leaving the bank. Sadly, the grenades set up a fire which burned the bottom drawer of the bank, and the kids died in there. So we found 2 bodies, I'd say, cut through into the walls. All a bit sad. Then handed over to the back watch. They had responsibility, the old part of Basra. We'd always make sure, this is one of the tea sellers in the town, so we'd always make sure we go past one of them. They always gave us free tea, hot sweet tea, which is nice. I got to do lots of drawing in Basra. That watch, it was a good sign if the kids were coming out, it meant you weren't going to get attacked. Fascinating seeing some of the old wooden buildings, some of the old Basra. When I say we were followed by kids, you really were followed by kids. Then went to the Irish Guards again. They had intelligence that there was a colonel from the Iraqi secret police, and he was known to be a torturer. They wanted to interrogate him, find out, and bring him to justice. His speciality was gouging out people's eyes. But we found out where his house was, turned up at 6 in the morning, knocked on the door, and there was a guy there who opened the door, didn't match the photos, it wasn't him. But he said, "Oh, well, the colonel's left the country, I'm just his driver. I don't know anything about it. He asked me to look after his house." This was done to an interpreter. Then the patrol said, "Well, is it okay if we search the house?" He said, "Yeah, fine." And the first thing they found in his bedside table was the colonel's passport. So he hadn't left the country, and he had his P cap with the intelligence insignia, so that's confirming who he was. So then a proper search started. And behind his bedstead, we found all these loaded weapons, included a gold-plated Heckler & Koch machine gun, which I never saw again. I'm pretty sure the platoon commander was that way. So his driver was hooded. You're not allowed to hood prisoners anymore, but in those days, he's hooded and taken back to their location for an interrogation. Unbeknownst to me, the Times, I was sending drawings back each evening. The Times are doing on articles. I think that it turns out that the line drawings I was doing were easy to print. This is in the Bath Party headquarters, more luxurious accommodation. I had my sleeping mat. I had to wash my clothes in a bucket, my socks and my clothes and my shirt were my main priority. They're dry overnight in the heat. And there's my stolen sheet that I ended up sleeping under for the next 2 months. Got to do lots of drawing in Basra. I spent an afternoon in jail. This was the Irish Guard breaking into someone else's house. It was meant to be a dance party. Someone quite high up in the bar party, which had just been made illegal. Turns out we got the wrong house, and poor guy had to dig out his savings, which are hidden under his bed. He apologised and left him to it. So I said I had no plan, but I couldn't go to Iraq without going up to Baghdad. And I needed an interpreter. I'd heard that the interpreters gathered around the hospital car park for some reason. So I went down, and this chap in the check shirt, I always wore check shirts as well, kind of clocked each other straight away. He was older than the others, quite like that, bit of a fatherly figure, had a trustworthy face. And I went up to him and said, do you fancy coming up to Baghdad, Babylon, Hilla for the next 3 weeks, and I'll pay you? Kind of worked out a daily rate. And his English was pretty good. So I said, right, let's do it. I said, do you know the way to Baghdad? Because all the road signs have been taken down pre-invasion just to confuse the enemy, so didn't know where we'd go. And again, I had no map. He goes, yes, of course I know the way to Baghdad. He did. He took me to meet his family. So this was his family in Basra. They fed me that night, which was lovely. Gave me a huge bag of dates. Basra is very famous for its dates. And his wife grabbed my hand at the end and said, please look after him. Please bring him back. I actually thought he was going to look after me and bring me back. Anyway, we both came. Daybreak the next day, we started to drive up, very long drive, 400 kilometers, whatever, to Baghdad. This is hard to see, but stepping off the way, there's an Italian anti-tank mine, an unexploded tank shell. The hazards were unmaskable. On the road up to Baghdad, the anti-tank mines had only been placed by the central reservation. There was no takes, it hadn't been disarmed. So it was just rows of anti-tank mines. I forgot to add that this is my first time driving abroad. I'd only passed my driving tests probably 2 years before. I didn't have a car. So just the driving bit, I was going quite slowly. There were no other cars on the road. There was dead dogs, dead donkeys, burning vehicles. It was quite exciting. We came on to Al-Qut. That was my route. Again, I've done a sketch map of someone else's map. There were kind of 2 routes to Baghdad. There was a coin flip. I chose Al-Qut, which is the one I heard. We came up to an American checkpoint where all the weapons were trained on us. They were all waiting to shoot. So we came up, my hands up. They're saying, well, sir, we're still fighting. And you could just hear the gunfire in the middle of town. So they're challenged at the Abrams tanks, still fighting insurgents in the middle of it. Good. So I said, okay, we'll go around the edge. Let me through the checkpoint. Going around the edge, I saw this farm building. Behind it was a destroyed armoured squadron. These T-62 tanks had turrets blown off. I just got to stop. And pulled up the car, tried to hide the car as much as I could, and left. Had a quick chat with him, saying, you stay in the car, any dramas, just tune the horn, I'll come running. I'll be gone about 20 minutes. Obviously took the car keys, I think I met him the day before. And said, oh, I've got to go drawing, I'll just go down the road. Climbed over the fence, down to this farm. And there was this tank squadron blown up. There was uniforms on the floor. In one of the tank turrets, there was a dog chewing on some bones. Yes, I can see helmets and bits of uniform. I could have spent months there drawing. But unbeknownst to me, I'd already been there for about 2 hours when I looked at my watch. Ran back to Hamid, who was white knuckled sitting in the car, going, Mr. Matthew, where did you go? You said me 20 minutes. The poor guy just been terrified, expecting to be robbed or something. Survived Al-Qut. just come down Cooks, I came across a military barracks. I thought, oh, I could go and have a look in there. Pulled up the car, hid it behind the wall. The kids were looting through the ammunition. They were taking the wooden boxes off the ammunition. I guessed the firewood. So Hamid and I had a chat with them, trying to say, look, all these mortar bombs, very dangerous. We need to be really careful. They weren't having any of it. Talking about big kids, I found a room at the back full of hand grenades. Now, my eyes lit up. I love hand grenades. These ones are Russian anti-tank grenades. I could see there was a pin on a stick, and I knew that the handle flew off. And I sat there looking for booby traps, thinking, is it safe? This is a one-off chance. I'm on my own, apart from Hamid. There's no other adults, no one around, apart from kids. All I could do is find a wall around the back. Great fun throwing some hand grenades. And I sat there, I'm in orange, shut. Then I saw a box at the back, which are all First World War Mills grenades. I thought, oh, well, I know how those work. And I couldn't find the handles and detonators. Anyway, I chickened out, and I still regret to this day I wasn't lobbing grenades. But I lived to tell the tale. And then turned up into Baghdad. Not quite sure how I found the Palestine hotels where the world's media had set up. And the Americans had set a cordon around the hotel. Baghdad at the time was just anarchy. There was no electricity, no street lights, no traffic lights. There was a tatty hotel next to the Palestine called the Jordan Hotel. I thought, that's the one for me. The bottom 3 floors had been blown out. Sadly, the restaurants had gone. But there was a room kind of livable up on the 8th floor. And had a balcony heading east, which was good for my satellite phone. So I managed to park up my car, and because it was in a secure zone, I felt happy leaving my car there. But just the tower block next door, someone ended up with about 20 or 30 rounds fired. They were shooting one of the Abrams tanks. And this is further square where the statue was going. So the Americans sent in a squad to clear out this tower block next to my hotel. At each balcony they came out going, floor clear, floor clear. As they got on, it took them longer and longer the higher up they go. And the shooter was never found. But just a welcome to Baghdad. This is Hamid, this is our hotel room. No electricity, no water. So to flush the loo, I had to use bottled water and flush the loo. There were rat or mouse droppings all over the carpet, but there were clean sheets. Clean sheets were the best thing ever. And I had a chair. So that was the first time. I had a cunning plan. I thought to get around Baghdad, I didn't want to drive around in my big Hertz car rental. So I went outside, I found the most battered taxi I could find. And it happened to be this guy, Abu Ahmed. His taxi, the back doors were held on my string. You had to hold the door closed. Had no lights, they were all broken. It just looked perfect. So Hamid sat on the right, Abu Ahmed drove, and I kind of hid in the back. So I was undercover, and I hired him for the next about 3 weeks to go exploring Baghdad. So I planned on it. I got going around Baghdad. This was a long while. I'd heard a rumour that bananas, for some reason, were never imported when Saddam Hussein was there. So there was a flood of bananas across the border. People went mad for them. Anyway, that's bananas in one of the shops. Kids playing on some of the anti-aircraft guns just by the Tigris River. This was the state TV building. When I got there, it was still broadcasting pro-Saddam Hussein propaganda. So the Americans dropped a bomb on the roof and set fire to it after telling all the staff to leave. I ended up getting a puncture in my car, even though I wasn't driving it. I came back with a flat tyre. So we took the time and I put it in his boot. He said, he was a bit of a fixer, sort of knew everyone in town. He said, I know where to go, I'll take you to a garage. They just found it hilarious that there was a Brit who had loads of RC. I then started thinking about my escape plan. Having a hired car from Kuwait, it ran on unleaded fuel, which is great. But in Iraq, I'd never even heard of unleaded, so I had to ask Abu Ahmed. He said, "I know someone in the black market. Find you some." So he took us to this location. The night before, there'd been this massive explosion in Baghdad that shook the whole city. He took me to this crater. Apparently, the American engineers had tried to blow up some munitions. And it was such a blast that it actually ended up killing the Americans. The bits of burnt uniform behind his vest, and this was part of their vid. The blast was so big. This comes on to the guy who lived about a kilometre away, who had the fuel I wanted to buy. So we just rocked up at his house, all the windows were blown out. He came out with like a comedy bandage around his head, a patch of red on the side. And this was all damaged from the night before from the blast. So he said, "Come into the garden," sat down at the end of this garden, and he said, "Watch where you're walking," because all around his garden were the tail fins unexploded mortar bombs that just landed on his house. And we did a deal over a cup of tea. Amongst these mortar bombs, he gave me a couple of gallon drums of unleaded petrol. I started a few days to explore around Baghdad. This was a special Republican Guard barracks. And painted targets on the wall. You can see the vehicles being looted of its wheels already. And this is a goat herder just wandering through. There's obviously no grass on the goats. Sadly, all the parachutes have been stolen, but there were uniforms and everything laid out. I was surprised to see they had British 349 radios. By the time I'd been away for almost 2 months, and I thought, right, got to get to Babylon. I'd heard of Babylon, and I didn't realise it was so close to Baghdad. So I thought, right, I've got to get there. My plan was I didn't know which way to get out of Baghdad, so I asked Abu Ahmed, the taxi driver, to lead me out one morning at daybreak and sort of lead me at a motorway junction and point me in the right direction. So that was fine. We met at first thing in the morning at daybreak. No other vehicles around, just empty streets. And then we kind of plotted that there were 2 American attack helicopters, a couple of gunships following us. We were the only 2 vehicles on the road. I still had my orange panel on my bonnet. I could just imagine them calling in, asking for permission to open fire while suspicious vehicles driving around Baghdad. We got to the sort of Cloverleaf Junction where Ahmed said, "Yeah, Babylon's down that road." Helicopters paused, but they're still just above us, or off to one side, 200 or 300 feet up. So I shook hands with Abu Ahmed. I paid him a Sainsbury's bag full of Iraqi dinar, paid him for that day's work, shook hands, and then started driving, at which point, thankfully, the American helicopters divided and left me. This was my first sight of Babylon. This was an ammunition truck amongst the date palms. And this is this is a replica gate of the Ishtar gate to Nebuchadnezzar's Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Saddam Hussein had it built, and it's about a 3rd scale replica. And Saddam Hussein had built another palace up on the hilltop, but ugly, monstrous concrete bunker, really. That's my translator, Hamid, and we met this guy who was kind of looking after the site. He showed us around. This was the oldest object found at the Lion of Babylon, which is 2,500 years old. I managed to catch a lift back to the UK on HMS Ark Royal. However hard I tried, I got completely lost below decks. I always had to ask my way to try and find my way back to the bunk. But it was a great way to turn up back into Portsmouth. As a kid, I remember seeing the ships coming in from the Falklands War on the TV news. And here I was actually on HMS Ark Royal coming into Portsmouth with all the crew and cheering. I got home, I had about 4 months, so just enough time to get married, and then went back out to Basra, got mobilised in the reserves. I saw all of the country through a rifle sight. There were occasional days off, so they were still drawing. I was getting a bit wiser. I made friends with the commander of the Joint Helicopter Force, which meant that I could fly around any days off. I got to fly around various parts of Iraq. Just enjoying inside a Chinook helicopter. Iraq at that time was getting more and more dangerous. The insurgency of Taliban started, or uprising happened. We were getting targeted, being in the uniforms we were wearing. This was a pipeline that was destroyed by insurgents. This is a hospital sign that just made me smile. Our accommodation was a bit more luxurious. We had tiny coronet rooms that housed two of us. I think we've just been brought over from Kosovo. They were still covered in mud from Kosovo. With some of the boys still drawing. I managed to get up to Baghdad to see the reviewing stand, Saddam Hussein's reviewing stand. It was said that the hand holding the swords was modeled on Saddam Hussein's own hand. We got water during the daytime, which back down in Basra, that only happened at night time. Taxis didn't work at Baghdad airport. Nice to me again, the Times are still running stories every now and then, so it's great for me getting the drawings in print. Then Afghanistan happened. The next 7 or 8 years, I went to Afghanistan 6 or 7 times, so I'm not going to go into each trip. I'm just going to go through rather odd stories. They're all happened in Afghanistan. It was quite a different experience because I was flown in. It was too dangerous to go outside of the bubble of being in the British Army. So I kind of saw the world through British soldiers' eyes. So it's a bit frustrating, but it's still interesting in other ways. So I started off the colonel of the RGBWLI, jokingly known as the Alphabet Regiment, which is a Royal Gloucester, Berkshire, Wiltshire Light Infantry. It was their last tour before they became part of the Rifles. He wanted me to record their tour. Their area of responsibility is mostly up in Kabul, which was dangerous but still fairly benign. This was 2006, before all the fighting started. So lots of foot patrols down the back streets of Kabul, which is fascinating. I always wanted to draw. See, a lot of operations happen at night time, and I just had this challenge to draw through some night vision. It's easier said than done. So with one eye, you're looking for night sight. With the other eye, you're trying to draw, so focusing on something and trying not to lose your night vision. It was a really complicated way of drawing. That's about the best I could do. So everything's given a green shine, everything's slightly out of focus. Different trip ended up in Sangin. There's a little story here. This tall chap here is the Afghan National Army commander. And he strutted around, he was taller than I am. He struck down the high street or the market street in Sangin, wearing no body armour, no weapon, just that on the boss, no rest of me. He was really passionate about getting the market up and running and bringing normal life back to Sangin. And we had this mission. We'd heard there were 2 IEDs buried in ideas of improvised explosive device. So it's one of the bombs that was most feared. And Lakeland called in that IEDs were buried in a wall. So we went out to look for it. Sure enough, we found one of the IEDs with a command wire going back to an orchard. Now, normally the British, when they explode something, they would wait till on the hour, 1/2 past. So it's an odd thing. If you heard a bang in Iraq or Afghanistan, they'd want to look at the watch. If it's on the hour, you go, well, it's friendly, they're blowing up munitions. Well, the Afghan colonel didn't know any of this. He borrowed a battery off his signaller, put the 2 wires together, initiated the bomb before telling anyone. Half his troops were just down the track, a bit too close to the bomb. We all got showered in debris. That is the Afghan way. Foot patrols were the most exciting, but quite unpleasant. You couldn't cross bridges because of the threat of them being booby-trapped or IEDs, so almost crossing the irrigated ditches. I would have my sketchbooks and everything above my head. It's quite interesting. There's always searching people's houses. The troops call it having rubbish. looking for lethal aid and bomb making kit, while at the same time trying not to offend them, trying to win hearts and minds. So this is an Afghan interpreter. Whenever you're offered biscuits and tea, it's really not to say no. That's quite nice. Have a break. Flying around in helicopter was the safest way to get about. Not so safe was going on the huge logistic patrols, which would be ambushed, almost guaranteed. This is the sort of flat terrain just outside the green zone. You can see it as a huge irrigation series of canals, built, ironically, built by the Americans in the 1950s. I got to see a lot of the training of the Afghan police. The Afghan police were it. The Afghan uniformed policemen weren't so a bit ragtag and less trustworthy. This is one of the Afghan National Army soldiers who were quite good. Soldiers were good, less corrupt. They did like colourful umbrellas. I tried to spend most of my time in patrol bases, which were the most basic, remote locations that were tiny, often ill-kitted out, sleeping under canvas, and you had to do cooking in ammunition boxes. Puffing billies, which are left over from the Second World War. This would heat up a bucket full of, or a dustbin full of water. That's what you'd shave with in the morning and wash with. This is a cooking fire inside a tent during a rainstorm. For an extra £5 a day, hardship allowance, you could have the joyful job of burning a human waste. This reminded me of some of those Vietnam War films I was brought up on. I'm not obsessed with going to the loo, but when you're drinking 7 or 8 litres of water, you're going for a pee all the time. These are urinals set up on the perimeter wall. They're just guttering pipes hammered into the ground. Obviously, a bit of military graffiti on the wall behind. The larger bases, this was jokingly called the honey wagon. This was the vehicle that went around and sucked out the effluents from reporters. No one knew what happened to it after that. I think he just went out in the desert and ditched it. Sleeping accommodation for some of the tents. That's me at work. This was a more recent trip. We got into a gun battle that lasted all afternoon. Felt quite safe being on the right side of this wall. And I got up onto the roof of a building with a sniper who was trying to get better eyes over the location. I was doing some drawing with him. This is on a sniper ammunition box. And we came under fire by a sharpshooter, an Afghan sharpshooter, where we got shot at probably every 20 seconds. You can actually feel the wind from the rounds going over both clutching, clinging onto the roof. So eventually someone brought us to the ladder and a rather undignified exit from the roof while he was giving cover and fire. Then I had the weirdest interview by the combat camera team while we were being shot at from the other side of the wall. That's a bit bizarre. That was another time coming up to an ambush point, jumping out of the vehicle, didn't have a clue which way the enemy was supposed to be, then disappeared by the time we got. This was one foot patrol. I was given the opportunity of either going out with the vehicles or on foot. So I went for the foot patrol because that would be more exciting. But it turned out the vehicle patrol was the one that got really ambushed. We saw it from about a kilometre away. The British had to call in high explosive mortar rounds and smoke to cover their withdrawal. One of the soldiers very proudly, when he got back, he had a bullet hole through his sleeve of his shirt. No other casualties. So a bit of wrangling. I managed to get into the Royal 3 Hospital in Camp Bastion. The British were very sensitive about it because of casualties. But somehow they thought an artist going in would be less intrusive and a bit of a softer way of approaching it. This was an Afghan local who came in with a gunshot wound to his lower back. He started off by saying, "Oh, I've been shot by the Taliban." But after about an hour, he goes, "No, the British shot me and I want compensation." Never quite believed what he heard. This is an Afghan soldier who was brought in and lost an arm. Some of the injuries are pretty horrific. The surgeons were a mixture of American and British and were quite keen to have someone there. So they were okay, come over and have a look. We're just doing an interesting bit of surgery. So I didn't really want to look, but anyway. There's a bit of a rare sight. This is what the enemy looked like. This is a wounded Taliban fighter. They're so elusive or would take away their own dead and wounded. So it's interesting to actually see one. Under the Geneva Convention, I wasn't allowed to take photos, so you're not seeing it. This kind of summed it up, a quick sketch during a patrol. The kids say the Taliban are near. The adults say they're a long, long way away. An icon chat says they're watching us. So icon, this is an interpreter in the blue hoodie. An icon is a device that scans through the radio channels, and it's how the interpreter would listen to the Taliban. And I never thought this would happen to me. This was walking in extended line, waiting to come under fire. Felt so much like the First World War. And the interpreter says, "Oh, Mr. Matthew, they're talking about." What do you mean they're talking about? Said they're talking about the blue man, because my body armor was blue. They kind of singled me out. And I was going, well, it might not be me. He said, don't know. They're kind of talking code. He said, no, it's you, because we crossed the bridge, and they said the blue man's crossing the bridge. So there we are, walking into an ambush, and I've already been signalled out. I was not very happy that day. Sure, we came under fire. Thankfully, the Taliban opened up a bit early. It was a bit out of range. The rounds were going high, and the bullets were spinning, so you could hear this as the rounds were above us. They were still kicking, but the rounds were staying. We then had to extract over about a kilometre of this open ground, so it's fire and maneuver. All of us fell over that ploughed ground. This is a platoon commander. These were enemy rounds coming in. He's just firing a parachute of illumination. We went out the next day, the same thing happened. Came under fire. We had to give covering fire while our troops exited. Found a new way of drawing. Instead of line work, I was using black ink. And there's a lot of hanging around before operations, so it's quite nice just to see these figures. A new, quite immediate way of drawing. This is some of the scariest bit because of the threat of IEDs. When anyone looks for a doorway, everyone else putting their fingers in their ears, expecting it to go bang as they set up a booby trap. The drones or UAVs were just coming into theatre. This was one I've never seen again. It's called a tarantula hawk. It was known as a flying dustbin. Never seen it again. Some quite challenging drawing, especially at night time. Again, to some of the small patrol bases. 2 o'clock in the morning, playing chess. And these were revival balloons. These balloons had a camera system that could be raised 400 or 500 feet up in the air and observe over all the compound walls. The insurgents hated them. This one was down because the wind was too strong. But someone still put 30 rounds of ammunition into the balloon. And I went and helped them patch up the holes that I've got on arms. But I ended up using my left arm. So I could imagine this guy had gone back, got some more ammunition, was about to fire some more rounds into the balloon. I was trying to use my left arm, so I kept my right on the side. This is one of the Afghan sentries looking one way. It's on his mobile phone. It shouldn't look that way. Sentry. These are some of the rocket strikes and some of the small patrol bases. What scared me most was walking through the green zone when these are the corn fields, when they're at the height. The insurgents had scattered anti-personnel mines through some of the crops, and they had zigzag tripwires made out of kite wires, so you weren't going to see it. So it's quite terrifying going through, trying to step in everyone else's footsteps, going through this full crops. This is a point man who's having a break with cigarettes amongst those fields. Just some of the vehicles. This is the closest I've got to an IED. It's a 2-vehicle convoy just outside Spain. I was in the second vehicle. It's just below an Afghan National Army checkpoint. Somehow the insurgents just got into this dead ground, planted an IED on the ground. The mine roller, for some reason, didn't set it off, and it blew off the back wheels of this vehicle. So this is one of the soldiers trying to clear a route. You've got to assume there's other bombs. And he's trying to rescue the crew from that vehicle. It took all afternoon before the vehicle got towed out. And that's a police checkpoint where one of the policemen came back. This is actually what an IED looks like. So there are very low metal content and a bag of homemade explosives. Obviously very effective. Sadly, soldiers were killed. And at night time, there's very moving repatriation where the soldiers' bodies were taken back to the UK. Remains of a suicide bomber. And I think I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going to leave it there. If you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to talk.
Well, thank you very much, Matthew. I'm sorry I'm not in the room with everyone, but first of all, I'd like to say a really interesting, fascinating perspective on those two conflicts, Matthew. So from me, a round of applause. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
And now, I can't see who's in the room, so if anyone, Matthew, if you could just take any questions, if you can see anyone asking in the room.
Have your hand up, please.
Yeah, cool. That's mine right there, actually. So you've had lots of trips to Afghanistan. You know, I don't know when the last Afghanistan was.
2013.
So have you got sort of any plans for any other ventures? So this seems to be a bit of a pause.
That was a bit of a pause. 2016, I wanted to go back out to Iraq to draw the Kurdish Peshmerga, just while they were fighting ISIS. I've got to admit, that was the last time abroad. I have been interested in Ukraine, certainly keeping up. Not a million miles away. Who knows what will happen? That answer it?
Yeah.
Any more questions? Yes, please.
When you were in the front line, dealing with the patrol, and you came under fire, did the platoon commander call down artillery fire or air support, and was it effective?
Artillery was too inaccurate to be called down, especially that close, if it's 300 or 400 meters. It was a fine line. They could call in aircraft, which would usually end the contact, meant that the insurgents leg it. Even if just a fly past of aircraft was enough to get them scared, fighting would end. But across the line, troops quite enjoyed the fight, so they didn't. It was only if it went really wrong, then they called in air support. Possibly mortars as well, and that's depending on the safety distance of the enemy. So yes, they didn't have much to call in on.
So the RHA,
I've never experienced them calling in on those units.
so the RHA had 105 guns, did they?
Yes, they did, yes.
And they weren't that accurate. Well, not accurate enough.
Not accurate enough. And at the time, they were very worried about collateral damage, so they didn't want to go damage someone's farm and kill civilians. And those rounds were a bit too inaccurate. So no, sadly.
Matthew, can I ask a question? Sorry if I'm cutting across anyone that I can't see, but some of you obviously, when you were in, shall we say, tight situations, you would do line sketches. Many of your other works are really very accomplished, and the coloured ink paintings. Can you tell us a bit about your technique and how long it would typically take, and how you would work in different circumstances?
Yes, sure. Obviously, the line drawings are just straight down into my sketchbook with a pen. In fact, here I am. I tend to work with ink drawings because you get very powerful colours straight away, dark shadows, strong colours. I just use 3 primary colours, very low tech. I've got sort of food dishes from aircraft flight meals. I find them perfect for mixing my colours. There was one time when I was in Iraq, when I was husbanding my water, I did end up peeing into my water bottle to draw from. I had a very bad habit of licking my brushes, so I had to stop doing that. And the more drawn out, if circumstances allowed, I'll sit and draw there on location with my inks as I am there. Other locations, other times, I'll take loads of photos, do loads of sketches, and try and work on them at a later stage, either in my car or back at whatever base. It just depended on the situation. I did whatever I could, depending on the situation and the security. Does that answer it, Joe?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And but one other question while I'm hogging you, as it were. I'm not sure if you mentioned this in passing and I missed it, but I know you are an Army reservist, and did that help you in your work as an artist in the war zones? The fact that you're familiar with military operations and military practice and kit, etc. How beneficial was that?
It's in hindsight, it did help me a lot. It meant I got out of a lot of the foot patrols. I've since spoken to other artists, and quite often they weren't even allowed out onto the ground, or only once or twice, whereas they were quite happy to take me out. So I'm guessing that was the difference. A few times they offered me a pistol to go out on patrols. I wasn't going to carry that. A few times when we were ambushed, they'd offer me a rifle, saying, okay, if they start getting close, you start putting some rounds down. I would have done that if the situation had arisen, but I wouldn't have told anyone that here, because that's crossing so many boundaries. I wouldn't have got there. I think it helps knowing the orders process, knowing not to get in the way, knowing to take cover. There's a thing called 5 and 20s. You have to do constant checks for bombs. So I was doing that instinctively. So I wasn't trying not to be a liability. Also, when I turned up to some of the tiny patrol bases, you've got to realise these are troops who've been together for years, then got deployed, and they're away from a lot of their commanders. So they're suddenly a really tight unit, quite isolated. And I'm a stranger turning up, so I would have to try and break into this sort of group of people. So I'd often do the washing up, help with the cooking, fill up sandbags, just join in the graft, just to try and become one of them. And after a day or two, you're one of the lads that sort of broke that tension. But it's really awkward initially. You'd just be dropped off by a helicopter and like, hi, here's a male. You just have to break through those barriers. So in our side, yes, it really helped in many ways, I think, being a reservist and just knowing how the system worked. Does that help, Joe?
That's great, thank you. Any other questions in the room?
Sorry, you can ask it.
You obviously had to work really, really quickly. As you went on, did you actually get faster and faster at capturing the image that you wanted to capture? That was your technique?
It never comes out how I wanted. I've never timed myself, so I never know. To me, my own space of world at time just stops and I'm drawing, so I couldn't tell you whether it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes. 30 minutes. No, they've gone and I'm still trying to draw. And then the next one might be quite similar, so I'll draw it in. Yes, sir. Sorry, yes, sir.
Interested in the difference between the and the purposes of the photo and the drawing. And because with the photo, it's absolutely realistic of what it is. Your drawing is your interpretation of that. It's less intrusive, isn't it, as you say? But what I don't know how long it takes to do one of those drawings, but of course a photo is instantaneous.
Yes, yeah.
So what sort of, when do you do a drawing and when do you take a photo and use that as the message?
Well, my photos were only to illustrate this talk. No one else has seen those photos. But yes, the media want very quick, instant photos, and ideally the film footage, and they just wanted the fighting and the guns and bullets and bombs, which I don't think my drawings quite conveyed. I however, captured the urinals and the portals being emptied, just the everyday life, and I could hopefully make that more interesting than a photographer would have been able to. And I think that the video footage is very immediate, it's been and gone, and you generally don't see it, whereas some of my drawings are still in the National Army Museum. They've got a longer life. And the fact that someone sat down, drawn it, thought about it. I leave a lot of things out, I use a lot of white space, so I can kind of focus in what I'm interested in drawing, and leave the rest out, so, which a photographer can't. So maybe I could capture the boring, mundane, everyday things, which a photographer maybe couldn't capture so well. Whereas they could do the fighting side better than I could. So I hope that answers. Any more questions? Please ask away anything that I'm covered. Yes, at that.
I was wondering, did you get like a response from the other soldiers about what you were doing? They were interested in how to come over to the
Question. Within the army, there's a great tradition of officers' messes, sergeants' mess, having drawings and paintings. So they weren't faced at all by having a war artist. It's like, yeah, whatever. Often, initially you turn up to an airbase and everyone's posing, saying, oh, I just want to be naked, shall I stand like this? But then they quickly get bored of me and I'm just sitting here drawing. Okay. And then they forget about me and then they start relaxing and that's when I get better drawings. So after that initial hoo-ha, it all calms down and I'm just part of the scene. Again, on the patrols, once they realise that I wasn't going to turn up in a bright red shirt or something and go running in a direction when the bullets started flying, they're quite happy, that I kind of fitted in. They kind of accepted me, thankfully. Good question, then, I like it. Anything else? Please ask away.
I've got one final question, Matthew. Would you go again? Would you? You're a slightly younger man when you did those tours. If the Times asked you to go to Ukraine, would you go?
Yes.
You're an adrenaline junkie.
A little bit. My wife is smiling. It's a good sign.
Okay. I can't see if there's any more questions in the room, but are there?
No.
If not, well, I'll just say thank you.
Okay, Joe, one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did your Afghanistan part make it back? So how did you sort of decide where it would be?
Obviously, fairly high mileage. I was just driven around. It came back undented, unscathed, and I still had the screws and the number plates. There was a bit of a patch where I peeled the orange marker off the bonnet. Yeah, I got away with it. Right, Johnny, that's it.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Matthew, for I think, as I say, a unique look at the experience of those two wars, and I thought were some really good questions as well. Particularly Michael's one about the difference between photography and the sort of art that you create, and I think it is about yours is a more mediated form and where you can direct the focus. But I found the talk fascinating. I think your work is absolutely stunning, and I'm very grateful. So thank you very much. Thanks everyone for coming. And good night, everyone.
Thank you for putting up with 40, 50 minutes of me blabbering. Very kind of surviving, braving the cold nights. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.
I'm very good. Yeah. Well.